good day everyone, and welcome to my Magicka Sorcerer guide for the Stonethorn patch. As always, this guide will consist of the general changes they have made in the Stonethorn DLC, then some information, again general stuff about the builds for this patch, and then the specific builds themselves I will be using, and lastly some honorable mentions. Things that I have also considered but you won't see me use much. As always, the builds will also be in the description of this video, as well as in my Discord server if you have any specific questions about this guide right here, or the things I will present, or the gameplay I've been having. You can put them either in YouTube or you put them in the Discord server, again link in the description. I will usually reply a bit faster there. Now, I don't really have much more for the intro, so I'm just going to get right into the changes that ZeniMax has made in the Stonethorn patch. First of all, there is these changes to sustain for Magicka Sorcerer. ZeniMax has made two small buffs, one in Crystal Fragments and one in Rebate, the Daedric Summoning passive. Starting off with Rebate here, as you can see, this passive is going to give you some magicka back when your Daedric Summoning abilities end, which in specific is Haunting Curse, but also Hardened Ward, making them a little bit cheaper, which is quite nice. This is a decent sustain buff, of course, and in combination with the fragment buff, which is now going to reduce the cost of the next skill you cast by 10%. These are two, they're not huge sustain buffs, but they are definitely worth mentioning, I think. I haven't noticed them that much. However, I do think it's nice, and I do think it helps with sustain dispatch, as it makes your most important defensive ability, Hardened Ward, cheaper, as well as many of your offensive skill because of Crystal Fragments and Haunting Curse. Another change they have done to Crystal Fragments is that the base damage that it will do has been reduced. However, the proc it deals, the proc will now deal 66% more damage, and those two changes combined have as a result that basically nothing changed for Crystal Fragments. You will still deal a very similar amount of damage dispatch as you did in previous patches. Then another change that will affect my builds a little bit that ZeniMax has done is the changes in Mundus stones. They have generally buffed quite a few of them, and most noticeably the Atronach and Serpent Mundus stone. These are now the most stat dense, so in my builds, whenever I can, I will try to go with the Atronach here instead of the Mage Mundus, though sometimes I don't have an option. I still have to go with Mage Mundus because Magicka Sorcerer always needs a pretty high amount of maximum magicka. There's also been a lot of set changes. This has basically been what this DLC is about. A lot of both small changes to sets like Brightrust Boast, where they just add like 16 more regeneration or something, but also a lot of big set changes, most noticeably to proc sets. It seems that ZOS really wants people to run proc sets this patch, but yeah, then again, many of the proc sets that ZeniMax has buffed or added are not really usable on Magicka Sorcerer. I will explain throughout the video why this is the case. But this will just bring me straight to the general information about the builds. So, as always, I'm going to go over all the basic stuff. So, as for race, the choice is still between High Elf and Breton. High Elf, I think, is slightly better. However, if you are a Breton, you don't have to race change at all. It is perfectly fine as well. As for the gear, you will see a lot of stat-based gear, so things that add maximum magicka, regeneration, etc. in my builds. Not much in terms of offensive sets or proc sets, because I think for Sorcerer it is still more efficient to build this way by just stacking a decent amount of maximum stats, regeneration, etc. and getting your damage through spell damage glyphs rather than offensive sets or proc sets. Also about the gear, just like last patch, Antiquities remain best in slots for Magicka Sorcerer, specifically Torque of Tonal Constancy here, and Malaka's Band of Brutality, one for regen, one for damage. You will almost always see me using one of these two antiquities in my builds because, well, they are simply best in slot for MagSorc. There is also the option to run monster sets. Prime example would be Pyre Skeleton for defense. Engine Guardian for sustain, and also a little bit of defense because of the hits that the Engine Guardian will take for you. And then lastly, Maw of the Inferno for some more single target pressure. These are decent monster sets, but again, I do consider Antiquities to be better, and as a sorcerer you don't really have an option to run both a monster set and an Antiquity, which is why you will not see me using much of those monster sets. That being said, if you don't have Antiquities, these 3 monster sets will be your best option after that. As for the traits in this patch, ZeniMax has nerfed Impenetrable yet again, making it about 2% critical damage reduction per Impenetrable gear piece. I think this is quite a hefty nerf, and when I can, I'm trying to move away from using Impenetrable. On the other hand, Well Fitted, Divines, and I think Invigorating 2 have gotten a buff. Now, you will, however, mostly just see me using Well Fitted, because I think magicka also works quite well with roll dodges, and using a roll dodge, like being able to cast an extra roll dodge because of the amount of Well Fitted you have, is often going to be more beneficial to you than having 4% or something extra critical damage reduction because you choose to use 2 impenetrable gear pieces. Invigorating and Divines, if you use the H-Knock Mundus with that, those are both sustain traits. They give like an okay amount of sustain, I suppose, but I generally still prefer to have Well Fitted for the roll dodge reduction, and actually the sprint reduction in as well, because often when I fight in towers and keeps and such, and I have to run up a ladder where I can't use streak, it's quite nice if the sprint that I will do then will cost barely any stamina. So in conclusion, when it comes to defensive traits, I prefer Well Fitted. Maybe I'll use some Impenetrable every now and then, just to deal with Stamblades and such, who have a huge amount of critical damage this patch. And maybe some Stamplers as well, but they are like much less of an issue. And then after that you have traits like Infused, Divines, Invigorating. About Infused, if you use that on a gear piece, it's gonna give you like 200 extra magicka on the big pieces. So if you use 3 Infused, you get like 600 magicka, which is nice, looks nice on the stats screen, etc. But I would still prefer 15%, not even 15, 18% roll dodge cost reduction over it. For the offensive traits, the choice here is between, let's see, charged, sharpened, and infused. So yeah, talking about all these 3 traits, charged is something that will proc your status effects many times when your glyph or your weapon ability hits a target. That being said, it's still a chance, so if the RNG isn't in your favor and you don't get the status effect from charged, that enchant is only going to proc every, I think, 4 seconds, so that means you have 4 seconds in which your weapon trait has been effectively useless. At least for open world, this counts for me because I use elemental weapon, which is going to apply its status effect regardless. So charge is a bit overkill for me. The only place where I would still like to use that is in setups where I would be running crushing shock, and then charge has a high, like gives me a high chance to apply both minor concussion and minor maim on the enemy, and burning as well, giving some extra damage. But outside of that, you won't see me using charged. Next trait is Sharpened. They have given that a small buff. I think it's about 500 extra spell penetration, which is just a bit less than 1% extra damage, when like a bit of a rough translation. It is obviously nice. So overall, this will give you about 5 to 6. No, I think just 5% extra damage to all your abilities. Is definitely worth running this trait. However, generally you will still see me using Infused most of the time, simply because of the high amount of concussion uptime and the fact that you also get these glyph procs every 2 seconds, which, even if concussion doesn't proc, will still add quite a nice bit of damage to your target. That being said, if you want to go Sharpened, by all means go for it. It's perfectly fine as well. The 5% overall damage granted by it is worth it. Now, about the champion points for MagSorc, those have also changed a little bit this patch for me. As I said before, I won't be using much Inpen anymore, which means that my critical resistance is going to be rather low. However, I do often still manage to get around 2.6 to 3k critical resistance, which isn't super high, but I think it's quite decent. for PvP. And yeah, so an important way I do this is through the champion points. Basically what I have done is stacking a little bit more into resistance. And this, of course, only counts for the red tree here, with points out of the other trees, mainly Hardy and Elemental Defender. When you compare to last patch, I will have less in these 2 CP passive, an equal amount in Bastion, and a bit more in Thick-Skinned, Ironclad, and Resistant. Now, the reason I've also changed Thick-Skinned and Ironclad is because, in fact, my CP setup from last patch was a little bit inefficient in the sense that with this change, so putting less in Hardy and a little bit more on Thick-Skinned, I will still have an equal amount in terms of percentage damage reduction. So for example, if you have direct physical damage, right, these get reduced by Hardy and Ironclad. The total sum percent of reduction I will get from these two this patch will be the same as I had in last patch, but I have some more extra points out of it. Basically it's a bit more of an efficient CP allocation this patch, and those points I have used for stacking a little bit more into resistance, helping me tremendously in getting a somewhat decent amount of critical resistance, which is again especially useful against Stamblades and any kind of ganker really. Next up, as in previous patch, the changes they have made to Vampire make it not worth running for MagSorc. The only thing you could possibly get use of is Undeath, which is a strong passive. However, as a MagSorc, much of the time you're at 100% health with a shield up. Ideally, you stay there as well, which means that you're not going to get much use of the Undeath passive as you would on other classes. Not to mention that the cost increase to skills is a tremendous, a very costly sacrifice to make. As for skills, of course, there's also nothing useful there for MagSorc, so you know, I still wouldn't run Vampire at all. Now for the skills, the bar setups are very similar to last patch. Last patch I like to run Fury often over Elemental Drain, and now again I switched back to Elemental Drain a little bit. Like, this is still a flex spot, a preference, something you want to choose in between yourself. Fury is going to give you a bit more burst when you try to one-shot somebody, and Elemental Drain is going to give you a little bit more of sustained pressure. I highly suggest you try both Fury and Elemental Drain here and see which one you like the most. But yeah, the burst combo still stays the same. You want to cast a curse, some spam balls, and then hit your fragment. Well, some spam balls with a streak in between, and then you hit your fragments right when the curse will explode. Overload is still my ult of choice. H-Knock is also good for holding your ground somewhere, and in some specific builds I will be using this. But generally I do still like to run Overload, simply because if you're dealing with a 1vx, it's nice to kite out like some group and then start bursting somebody down with Overload, and then a streak into it as well. You can deal a huge amount of burst with it, and the best part is often you will still have ultimate left to then target somebody else as well. And lastly, with tanks, this is also a really good ultimate against tanks in my opinion, because the combination of this and unblockable and undodgeable stun makes sure I can kill quite a few of them. On the back bar, also still a very similar setup, but there is two things I want to talk about. First being Healing Ward. I have mentioned this, I think, somewhere last patch as well, but I have switched to Healing Ward now consistently instead of Rapid Regeneration. There's one exception for this, I will go over that, but in general I advise using this. This is simply going to be more of a burst heal than Rapid Regeneration. Because the shield size does not get affected by the nerf to healing that they have done last patch. So it's still going to give a really nice amount of healing. Now, one drawback Healing Ward might have is that it can get taken down when under heavy pressure, and then you won't get any healing at all. However, if you stack that shield properly under Hardened Ward and Dampened Magic, and you use your Streak as well, or Ball of Lightning, whichever one you have, to reduce the pressure that you take, you will be able to consistently pull off Healing Ward and get a huge amount of healing from it. As for the ultimate, I'm still using Undo here instead of the Resto ult, simply because on light armor builds, the Resto ult I don't really find that worth using anymore, because it's too risky. You just simply take too much damage, and Resto ult doesn't heal for as much anymore, again because of the healing nerfs they've done in last patch, which Hence, yeah, which is the reason that I run undo here. Not only do I still have a defensive ultimate when I get out of a position quickly or just as a panic button, but it also gives me the minor protection, reducing my damage taken, so I definitely find this worth. And lastly, I also get that physics shield, so when I'm under heavy pressure or I get ganked or whatever, just doing a quick block is going to give me a very, like, a small shield, but still noticeable on top of my hardened and dampened magic, allowing me to survive and burst quite a bit easier. As for the consumables in the builds, generally I will try to move on to Sugar Skulls, as this is also more stat dense than Spring-Loaded Infusion or any other fruit really. And you will also see me still using the Spell Power Potions in combination with the Escapist Poison on the back bar. Something I forgot to mention earlier actually with the front bar traits. If I would go Sharpened, the Shockclef does not have that much use anymore, so I would like to run a Poison on top of that, but running a Poison on both bars is a bad idea, because then they share a cooldown. I could place the poison here on the front bar, but that leaves me a bit at a loss on what enchant I want to place on the back bar. A magic regeneration enchant would be a good idea. However, I do not think that little bit of regeneration is worth it, to be honest, in comparison to the amount of like damage that a Shockclef, and if you use Shockclef, is going to add. As I have mentioned in a previous video I uploaded, MagSorcs are basically gone for cyrodiil, so you won't see me run MagSorcs in cyrodiil at all anymore. In the battleground I still do, I will explain why later, but for starters let me explain why I don't run MagSorc and cyrodiil anymore. Basically because the Twilight heal got quite a nerf. While last patch it would be healing for about 15 to 16k, now we are talking about 10, 11, 12k, and slotting two skills, like using two skill slots with a heal that can be killed, because people can kill the pet, for a tooltip that is similar to, say, a Templar's Breath of Life, while you have other really good healing options such as Healing Ward or even Crit Surge available. I don't think it's worth running pets anymore. Like they definitely come out on the bottom here. So that's why you won't see me running any of these in cyrodiil. Does that mean it's bad to run them? Like, does that mean it's not viable at all anymore? No, it doesn't. You can still run a MagSorc, but if you want to have builds for that, you just watch my previous guide as well. There's someone there that still work this patch. But I generally do think it's just better for me to run non-MagSorc. Now, for the specific builds, the first build I'm going to present is basically a follow-up to the Roll Sorc build I had last patch. It's going to be 5 pieces of alfiq in combination with 5 pieces of shacklebreaker, with the Torque of Tonal Constancy, Destro Resto, and 1 Dummy House piece. It's quite a stat dense build in the sense that I have a good amount of maximum magicka spell damage and magicka recovery. If my maximum magicka is around 45k, I'm quite happy this patch. Like, this is a good amount of shield size. And if you stack that higher, you start getting a bit of a diminished return on damage you deal. But I know for sure that 45k magicka is a comfortable position for me, so that's kind of what I try to aim at in terms of MagSorc builds. My magicka recovery, like with tonal, this is a bit high still. I'm still on the fence here whether I'll want to go for this amount of unbuffed magicka recovery or slot one more spell damage glyph. However, like even with this amount of unbuffed magicka regeneration and tonal on top, I still manage to run out magicka sometimes. So that's why I'm still testing and trying out. Now, the reason I've switched to Shacklebreaker and alfiq for the roll dodge build specific is because, of course, Shacklebreaker is going to add a lot of stamina sustain. You'll have a very high stamina pool for MagSorc, which is 19k. Usually this is around 16 to 17k. And your stamina regeneration also gets a small buff in combination with the high elf passive and Torque of Tonal Constancy. This is a really nice amount of stamina sustain, which allows me to do a lot of roll dodges, as you will see in my gameplay videos as well. Whenever you see me like fighting a group and I roll dodge a lot, know that I'll be running this build, as it allows me to do that and play around those roll dodges a lot, thus reducing a lot of damage incoming to me, allowing me to animation cancel stuff as well, and also just the mobility it gives is really nice, as you can just ignore any root or snare cast at you and you can kite really well with it, which is especially important for me because I like to fight quite large groups, so having a good amount of kiting is really nice for that. And being able to spam roll dodge once I get jumped on is also just quite epic. I like to run 7 pieces of well fitted on this roll dodge build. For now I still have 1 piece impenetrable here, the shacklebreaker sash, but I do intend that to change that also to well fitted one of the coming days. If I do that, my roll dodge cost will be about 1.7k stamina, which is pretty damn low, and I can use that a lot of times, thus reducing a lot of damage, much more for example than the impenetrable would give me. Another thing I like about this build is that it can make use of sugar skulls and the H-Knock Mundus, which are just the most that dense kind of like consumables and passives and such, which allows me to have a really high amount of stam stain, as I mentioned before, but still have a good amount of regeneration, damage, and maximum magicka, which is why I very much like this build. As for the CP and everything, like in detail of the enchants and such, like I'm not gonna go over it every single time. You can always find it in the build links as well in the description and on the Discord server. Now for the second build I have for this patch is alfiq, boast, and talk of tonal constancy. You see here on the stat screen that this still has a decent... Oh wait, I need to use... with the spring-loaded infusion, of course. You see here on the stats screen that this gives me a little bit more maximum magicka and more damage as well. Here I have dropped the magicka regeneration a little bit. It was simply to test out the effect on it on talk of tonal constancy. As I said before, I do still manage to run out of magicka regeneration, but I think eventually I'll stick around with this amount of unbuffed magicka sustain, so about 1.6 to 1.7k. Also for the previous build, the roll dodge build, when I'm running talk of tonal constancy. Despite not having as much stamina sustain, you definitely still have a sufficient amount for proper fighting in cyrodiil. I do use 2 pieces of impenetrable here. This together with a little bit higher amount of maximum magicka will help counter the fact that I can't roll dodge as much and thus not reduce as much damage taken. Plus having a critical resistance that is close to 3k just looks better as well. But keep in mind that the 2 pieces of impenetrable I use here is only 4% critical damage reduction, so I think throughout the patch it's very likely that I will switch to full well fitted here as well, as 4%, like that is not much at all. I'd rather be able to just roll dodge and nightblade combo like another time rather than taking a little bit less damage from it. But in essence this build is quite simple. It has a bit of everything: good magicka, good sustain, good damage, and alright stamina recovery. It's not super good at anything, but it's definitely a very good choice for starting out, as it gives you solid stats on everything. As I said before, for my roll dodge build I went for shacklebreaker and alfiq instead of this, which means that you won't be seeing me running this anymore. But yeah, the reason I'm still adding this is simply because it's still like a good build, and I know there's a lot of people that still have these sets from the previous patch, so if you want to run this build, it's perfectly fine, still works perfectly well. Then, the next build is going to be the follow-up to the heavy armor build I had in the last patch. That build is going to be alfiq. As always, you needed to have a little bit of a decent magicka, maximum magicka, in combination with magnus now. Oh yeah, and actually let me switch back to the sugar skulls, as here you will be using sugar skulls food again. There we go. Now we're at a comfortable 45k magicka, quite a bit of maximum health as well. This will be about 24k when you enter cyrodiil, and a good amount of stamina sustain as in the previous builds. Actually a little bit more stamina sustain than alfiq and boast, for example, because here you also have the constitution passive from heavy armor that's going to start kicking in. Now, as for heavy armor sets, I am using magnus here in combination with the alfiq. Magnus got quite a significant buff this patch. Now it's going to have 15% negated abilities cost. To quickly sketch to you how potent that is, I'm going to have a little bit of a simulation here. So assume that all your skills cost 3k magicka, and you cast about 50 of those magicka costing skills per minute, right? Now on 100 skills, 15 of those on average would have their abilities cost negated. On 50 skills that would be 7 of those abilities then. So 7 times an ability of 3k will be about 21k magicka per minute. To give you a comparison on how strong that is, the Warlock set is going to give you about 12k magicka per 45 seconds. So even if you have bad RNG on the Magnus set here, you will still have something that is about as potent as the Warlock set, which is a good set for MagSorc, by the way, very good for backbarring as well. But if you have good RNG, or just even, you know, an average amount of RNG, this is going to be more sustained than that already. Now, there are some things to keep in mind here, which is of course that when this thing is going to proc, any cost reduction passives you have will be ruled out. Which is exactly why I'm using it on heavy armor, because heavy armor, high elf heavy armor setup doesn't have any cost reduction passives. You have like one cost reduction passive from Crafty alfiq here, from the light armor piece, I mean. But that's it. Everything else, like there's no cost reduction in this build, meaning you will get about the maximum use of Magnus when it procs. To stay with this, I quite like it. Combination of having Magnus, Constitution, an alright amount of base magicka recovery, and elemental drain on top. Make sure you can sustain a fight really long, which is something I like about this heavy armor build to begin with. It's just the fact that you are quite resilient. You only have one shield, but you can take quite a bit more damage in my opinion, and you can focus more onto trying to get a lost kill before you go on the defensive bar again with this build. Sustain, I think, is really nice with it as well. Damage, which is often an issue on heavy armor, has been resolved because I'm running Malakath with this, one piece Domi House and one piece Malakath. I think like the only reason heavy armor MagSorc is viable to begin with is because of this set. With Malakath, if I equip this, I'm going to have a similar amount of damage as many light armor builds have. Of course, you can still reach a higher maximum amount of damage on light armor because of the spell pen, etc. But with this Malakath's Bound of Brutality, I think the damage is quite similar to many of those builds, and thus worth running. This is also a build I prefer in a group setting, so everything like 2vx and above. I don't really go like in a small scale or very large group. Like if I go in a group, it's more like 2vx, 3vx or something like that. And in that, I do prefer to run this heavy armor setup as well. There's a couple of alternatives for Magnus, which I will go over in a bit as well. But in general, I'm running this setup in groups because it allows me to tank things out together with the other members of the group. For example, if I'm playing with a Magicka Decay, which is not really a good combo for 2vx, heavy armor is going to allow me to still tank things out without the Magicka Decay, without having to run out of the fight every now and then because of the squishiness that light armor is. Thus making it quite a bit more efficient, I think, for those kind of fights. For the skills, front bar is about identically the same. Again, you can run H-Knock if you want to. Not this morph, of course, the stationary creature H-Knock. I'll run this in Battlegrounds, but more about that later. As for the skills, you have a flex spot here, because Dampened Magic dropped away. You can't run it on heavy armor. There's three options here that I can slot. First is Mines. It's not too strong of a skill anymore, however, I do still very much like running this. As you can see, it has a high cost and everything. However, again, Magnus can negate that. I mean, look at that. If it's 5k magicka, if your Magnus procs on this set, that means you have 5k magicka returned just like that. It's, you know, I think it's quite strong like that. But in any case, I do like to run Mines. It helps against melee people and all that, and often when I fight a bunch of Zerglings, they kill themselves in the mines too. So, and for me in general, it's just a lot of fun to use. But you are by no means forced to use this skill in this build. So if you want to switch it out, the two other options are Degeneration. With Degeneration, if you slot this on the back bar, that means you can run tripods instead of spell power pods, because you get your major souls free this way. And the last option is Soul Trap, that being Consuming Soul Trap. But then you will also have to change your heavy armor set of Magnus into Oblivion's Foe. Now, Oblivion's Foe is also a set I've tried quite a few times, and is the first proc set to be mentioned into this video. As you can see, it gives a very big amount of extra pressure added on top of Consuming Trap, making it quite a noticeable damage increase and pressure on the enemy. And on top of that, keep in mind I'm using Consuming Trap here. If you kill an enemy, you get almost 10k magicka back, which is like quite noticeable in terms of sustain. That being said, wait, let me actually equip that as well, these the Oblivion's Foe, so I can show you what the tooltip is. with it is going to deal 30k, consuming trap over 10 seconds. That's a big amount of pressure right there. But yeah, as I was talking about proc sets earlier, there is one problem I find in running this solo. First of all, the regeneration from running this is going to be quite reduced. Why is this? Because I'm going to have to run the mage mundus here. As you can see, while sorting Oblivion's Foe, my maximum magicka has dropped a little bit too low for me to still be viable. I know it's heavy armor, so your shields are more resistant, but you still only have one shield. So to make it a little bit bigger, I do try to run the mage mundus here, which means the magicka regeneration gets dropped a little bit. You don't have Magnus on top anymore either, so, you know, sustain is a little bit hard on this, but damage is also bigger, in my opinion. A second problem that proc sets like these have is many of the proc sets they added are dot proc sets, and this is one of them. And the issue with that on MagSorc is that you don't have any additional long-term pressure to add on top of that. I think the real strength of sets like Oblivion's Foe is when you can add a whole bunch of other dots on that, or buff consuming trap even further. It's nice without already, but I do prefer to run without something like this in many situations, not all, because just you can make the proc sets much more potent if you have extra long-term pressure on top of that. That being said, this is 100% a viable alternative. Both Magnus and Oblivion's Foe are craftable sets as well, so if you want to try it out, it's quite easy to do. And Stam Sustain, by the way, has a little bit of a buff, so it's definitely not all that bad. I've run it on stream as well and gotten good fights with it. A last option you can run here is the Essential Defender set, which I've also tried a couple of times, both this patch and in the previous patch. Essential Defender is the highest sustain you can possibly get in the game. With a heavy attack, you're going to restore a huge amount of stamina and magicka. It's about 7.3k as the tooltip here states. It also works really well for MagSorc because you are constantly dealing direct damage, which means that this set will load to its maximum basically a lot of times. So I do also like to run this set. However, it leaves a bit of a low amount of base regeneration. Still quite alright, it's definitely worth a try. I think I have a clip of it in one of the videos in the previous patch, and I hope that at some point this patch you will also see a video with this set. I think the only real drawback of it is that you need to do a heavy attack for it, and MagSorc heavy attacks aren't that good. Inferno Staff heavy attack, like I don't even want to start casting that because the chances that it will be missed or that you won't be able to finish it or whatever are just too low for me to bother. And then you have the Resto Staff heavy attack, which at least can't miss, but it still takes quite a while and you are quite vulnerable while casting this in a fight. When you're under heavy pressure, you basically don't have any time at all to do a heavy attack because it slows you down, it takes a lot of time. So you want to make sure to adjust your gameplay to the point where you are comfortable casting a heavy attack before you get into heavy pressure, and this way keeping a high amount of sustain. And if you do that, this becomes a really potent set and definitely also worth a try, something I use every now and then in cyrodiil as well. But that concludes it for the heavy armor setup. The next build for this patch is alfiq, lich and Malakath. It is just like Brighter's Boast, another setup from previous patch. These two are basically the survivors from last patch, still very solid builds. But now about alfiq lich in specific, it still has the same benefits as it has last patch, namely that you can run the Master Inferno with it, which has a huge burst potential if it hits. You won't see me using Master Inferno that much because the CC is shitty, and very often you're going to either miss the destructive clench you cast with it, or you're going to deal with a tanky target that you can't break through, because this is not unblockable nor undodgeable, unlike Streak, which is in my opinion a much better CC. That being said, if you do manage to knock somebody back with it and he's on the ground, and then after that you cast a fragment after it, this build has a huge damage potential. Now, as you see, the maximum magicka is a little bit low here, which is why for this build you want to switch to the mage mundus. It's going to drop your magicka recovery, obviously, and you're going to have to counter that up by using more regeneration glyphs instead of spell damage. Right now here I have spell damage glyphs because I also use these two jewelry pieces for my Battleground build, which I will go over in a bit. As for the other sets next to alfiq and the lich, I do still like to run 2 impenetrable with this as well, then 1 piece Domi House and Malakath. There's 2 ways of running this. You can do it with Malakath, which further I think emphasizes the high amount of burst you can have with this build, and the other option is Torque of Tonal Constancy, but with that you can go with a Sword back bar of the Lich instead of the Restless Staff, which is going to make you, oh no, not on this bar, which is going to make you a little bit more tanky. Because you have more maximum magicka, and you have the Sword passives, and you have the regeneration from Sword on Board. With this you will also, instead of the classic MagSorc setup with healing ward, etc., have to run crit surge, which is what some people do prefer to do, as crit surge will be giving a bit more of a sustained healing over time in comparison to healing ward. Front bar can stay the same. You can consider placing the greater H-knock morph here, which is going to create kind of a hold your ground playstyle, because having greater H-knock in combination with clench, if you start clench, this is what the bar will look like, by the way. So this here, as you see, and burst ability, ball of lightning, not streak, and crushing shock as elemental weapon, or crushing shock as a spammable. If you have H-knock here as an ultimate in combination with this short range CC, you will have a lot more potential to kind of hold your ground with this build, which is I think why some people like it as well. Ball of lightning, absorbing all projectiles, also further allows you to do that. Now, one more thing I want to mention, of course, is that when you run Malakath on a build, I forgot to mention that in the heavy armor builds earlier, but you will need the CP change. Malakath adding a 25% extra damage will be about 20 to 21% in reality when you have also set your CP accordingly. So instead of having these points into Elfborn, you want to make sure to switch that out and divide them across Elemental Expert, Master at Arms, etc. You will see the CP setups of that again in the build editors. I'm not going to go over all of that because I've done so many times in previous guides. In any case, one more thing is on the back bar. I am using Lich still on the back bar. Other options would be Warlock and Magicka Furnace. However, I do still think for CP campaigns, Lich is the most regeneration. I've done some, like, I've you know, compared the total magicka you get per minute with the other 2 sets, and I think Lich still comes out on top here. That being said, if you want to use Warlock, that's just fine as well. It's also a very similar set to it, and better in no CP as well. That concludes it for the builds I will run in the CP campaign. One more thing I want to mention before I go to the no CP builds. These 4 builds actually have a 5th one that I wanted to add before, which is running 5 alfiq on the body pieces with Domi Hounds and Malakath, and then the Winterborn set on the front bar, with also of course 1 armor piece, the jewelry, and the destruction staff, with on the back bar then either trainee or something like VBRP resto. However, I am not presenting this build yet because simply I do not have Winterborn yet, but I do want to talk about it because I'm gonna get it at some point this patch, so I will let you know whether it's strong, of course, but I need to farm this inferno stuff, which is proving to be quite a pain. In any case, Winterborn, and this brings me to the subject of proc sets, I think is the strongest proc set you can have for Magicka Sorcerer. I think it's very comparable to the old Viper. It has a similar cooldown of 6 seconds, Viper was 4 seconds, a similar burst damage that is unavoidable just like Viper, but more actually. And on top of that you also get this bit of an annoying snare on the enemy. Next to that, it's also very reliable to proc because you're going to proc this with Crushing Shock. Crushing Shock having a little bit of frost damage is going to proc Winterborn on top of that, which means that if you want, you can easily proc this thing quite calculated in the middle of a burst combo, which makes it a very viable proc set because of how reliable it is and the fact that you can't miss it either. And when I compare them to other proc sets, say things like Icy Conjurer or Kalurian or whatever, these always have one of 2 problems. Either they are long dots, where I can't put any other pressure on top, so I would rather play it on another class that have like some dots or whatever that you can place on top of that, or they are avoidable. taking a look at Icy's Conjurer and Kalurian especially, they are very telegraphed sets, and even with the reduced travel time that Kalurian has gotten, I think it's quite easy to avoid, and having a 5-piece negated like that is something I really don't like. Next to that, Kalurian, like proc sets in general, I like to run this with Malakov, and Kalurian doesn't allow that. Doesn't mean it's a bad set, but I don't really like that much. But yeah, those two reasons that most magicka proc sets are either easy to avoid or a dot that you can't really make use of that much on MagSorc. Oblivion's Foe also falls in this category, by the way. Those two reasons are not a thing when you talk about Winterborn, which I think will make it a really strong set for front barring a proc. But yeah, that being said, I have not been able to try it yet because I simply don't have the Inferno yet. When I do have it, and when I have tried it, I will let you know in one of those comments, a pinned comment, on how the testing with this set will be going. But yeah, so much about the proc sets. Now for the nocp builds. The first one will be for cyrodiil, and the second one will be for battlegrounds. The nocp cyrodiil one is going to be alfiq, ironblood, Master's Inferno, and Talk of Tonal Constancy. I like to run 2 pieces of impenetrable here, and then the rest still and well fitted for the extra stamina sustain. With Talk of Tonal Constancy, as I said, I mostly run Talk of Tonal constantly in nocp cyrodiil because this fixes a lot of the sustain problems that nocp gives magicka sorcerer. Still, backbar Resto Staff with Healing Ward. I don't really want to try and rely on crit search with this. Front bar Master Staff will give you quite a bit of nice burst. I think it's nice in nocp because it's a bit like people don't avoid your CC as much as they do in CP. Not to mention that I just want to backbar Ironblood, a set which I have not been using in previous patches but has been used every now and then by other people, and now I have also picked it up for nocp. The reason I'm doing this for this patch is because nocp is generally a very hostile environment for magicka sorcerer, and let me explain you why. First of all, the regeneration is strongly reduced, so you're gonna have to add something on top of that. There's no problem, you can do it with Talk of Tonal Constancy. You will still have some problems, but that's okay. Secondly, you will take much more damage there, because your shields are strongly reduced in their strength, both because of the CP Bastion passive that you lose and the great amount of maximum magicka that you lose. Say a build that stacks, for example, weapon damage or spell damage isn't going to have that problem as much because CP doesn't buff that, but they do buff maximum resources, and that is something you are significantly reduced in nocp. Ironblood is going to help me counter that a little bit. It's going to give me major protection, which is going to strongly reduce the amount of damage I take. Keep in mind, nocp is also like heaven for proc sets and such, which is going to further increase the damage you will be taking there. Also, the amount of Nightblades in there is kind of crazy, which is why I definitely want to have a defensive set for nocp, and in my opinion, Ironblood comes out on top here. You do have the movement speed reduction, which is basically the only drawback of it. However, you can still kite with that just fine. I'm not going to explain you why. If you want to know how that still works, my previous gameplay video, I will link it in the description as well, has a clip. The second clip there is in nocp with Ironblood, and I kite a group of people all the way from somewhere halfway Robeck and Nickel to a rock where I want to 1vx them. So just to showcase you can still kite just fine with that. As for the skill setup with this build, I do still like to run Resto ult in this case, because that is still a very nice amount of healing in nocp, and I often quite need it to just reduce the amount of incoming damage. I know it's still a bit risky because it's a light armor build, however you are running a defensive set, which makes it sometimes quite a bit better. As a front bar ultimate, I like to run H-Knock here. You don't need as much damage from Overload to take down tanks, etc. in nocp. Again, greater H-Knock, not charged. This is what I use in BGs. Skill setup, again with a spammable and then reach on top, clench on top. I do like to run the 3 shields here, like shields with major protection on top is quite strong. That being said, even with a build that focuses so much on the shortcomings you have in nocp, I still don't like MagSorc very much in nocp. You have the regeneration, the damage, and a lot of defense with this build, but it still remains, in my opinion, a very hostile environment because of the amount of proc sets that run about, how easy it is for a Zerg to chase you down. like, yeah, the reduced amount of kiting you can do is the reason because of that. Not only if you have ironblood, but also without ironblood, nocp is much harder to start kiting around in. But yeah, those are things that I really don't like about nocp, which is why you won't be seeing me running it that much. But when I do run it, this is by far my favorite build for it with defensive sets. If you don't have ironblood, which is probably going to be the case for a lot of people, you're going to need another kind of defensive set. An option you can run then is Brighter's Boast, Alfiq, and Pirate Skeleton on top of that. But like all those other setups that I have tried or thought of at the very least are not as strong as this would be. So this is really the only nocp I will have, only nocp build I will have for you this patch. Then for the battleground build, this is still the only pet build I still have for this patch. Now, for starters, the reason I run pets in battleground is there's actually two reasons. The first reason is that this allows me to have a little bit higher amount of maximum magicka. Let me actually cast that pet as well. I do like to run the mage mundus with this build, which is going to bring the magicka in battlegrounds to almost 40k, which is quite decent. You will have a pretty big shield with that. The pet heal, which has gotten a nerf, I think is relatively strong in nocp still, because there the value is not reduced that much at all. You will still have an around 10k or 10.5k heal there. Which is also going to heal your group members. So in the battleground specifically, the ability to somewhat support your group members a little bit through this is also a reason I like to run pets. Let me remove that annoying flying there. On the front bar here, I like to run Crushing Shock instead of Elemental Weapon, because it allows me to interrupt sorcerers in there, and if you interrupt the sorcerer in a battleground, it's often a death sentence for that sorcerer, which is nice to have. You will see that I don't have Fury anymore for the kill stealing in battlegrounds. The reason is that Fury has become a little bit inefficient just throughout the patches for kill stealing. There's two reasons for that. First of all, it has a delay on it, like this lightning strike. It doesn't hit the target immediately, which is quite important to have for a finisher. And secondly, it's also easy to avoid, like people can roll dodge it, and even if it does hit, people sometimes don't get killed by it if the enemy builds somewhat tanky. And when he is at low health, he will be spamming roll dodge or just holding block and heal. There's quite a good chance that Endless Fury isn't even going to kill him. The same counts for Crushing Shock, of course. It won't be enough damage either, but at least this is instant and not as easy to avoid. As for ultimate, there's two I like to use for the battleground build. One is Summon Charged Acelak over here. I'm choosing this morph over the Greater Acelak because the hold your ground playstyle that the Greater Acelak provides is not as useful for BGs, as you want to move around constantly with your group, following your group, etc. It will still give the major berserk to your allies, which is quite nice if you have, for example, a Majdan or a Stamina Necromancer with one of those strong ultimates in your group, such as Northern Storm or Goliath or you name it. They're going to have that 25% damage increase, which is really nice. It also deals a little bit of AoE shock damage every now and then, almost 10k in CP. In nocp this will still be, a better amount than the single target damage that the Greater Acelak will give you. The other option as for ultimate is, where is it? Oh yeah, here, Dawnbreaker. It's a physical damage ult, however, because you don't have any CP in battlegrounds, this will deal more similar damage to magic damage ultimates. On top of that, if you go with Sharpened instead of Infused, again, you can use both. I'm keeping my Inferno Staff Infused because I still think that's a good trait as well for cyrodiil. But in Battlegrounds, Sharpened, if you do that, you will still have some amount of penetration, even like physical penetration on a Dawnbreaker as well. If you stack that up with some ults from other people, or you just smack down an entire group for that, opening them up for other people to damage as well, adds a little bit of nice burst. It's a bit more of a selfish option than Acelak here, but it does deal quite a large amount of burst, which with a much cheaper cost than Acelak as well. But in any case, that concludes it for the builds for this patch. Just a little bit of an explanation on the honorable mentions now. I'm going to go over this rather quickly because many things here I repeat almost every patch. First of all, you got the proc sets such as Icy Conjure and Colurion. Many of those are not usable for MagSorc, as I have explained before, because you don't have any pressure or they are easy to miss. Exception on this is Winterborn, which is looking like a really good proc set, as I was talking about before. Then the Asylum Inferno staff, which has gotten a bit of a buff this match. It only needs 2 casts of Crushing Shock anymore in order to proc. But the problem is that this makes your rotations a little bit too rigid. Let me explain you why. So ideally, if you cast a curse and then 2 Crushing Shocks in a row, if you try to CC and cast a fragment into somebody right at the Crushing Shock as the curse explodes, it's getting a little bit difficult. Casting like a Crushing Shock and a skill and then another Crushing Shock is going to be difficult as well to proc the Asylum Inferno staff. And yeah, the problem with such a rigid rotation is also that in cyrodiil I like to switch from back to front, from front bar to back bar all the time to cast a shield or ban the storm and then do some burst and then cast another shield in the middle of burst before I have things explode. And this is something you can't really do with the Asylum stuff either, which is why you won't see me using it this patch and why it is an honorable mention. Other things are the Bloodthirsty trait, which I've seen mentioned every now and then as well. The problem with that is that I don't really want to give up the shield size and the base amount of damage that Arcane would give me. It is of course more damage, especially when people get on low health. However, if you want to finish people off, just get a finisher. I am not ready to lose the shield size that Arcane is going to give me for something that only really starts getting value when people get below 50% health or lower. I think in PvP the time that the execute time basically that Bloodthirsty becomes really strong in is a bit too short. If you want to finish somebody off, just get Fury. Like, it's not a bad finisher, you can cast it early in your rotation and get a good amount of burst with it. Purely as a finisher, like spamming it while somebody is already at below 20% health, doesn't work out that well. But yeah, that's not how the skill works to begin with. You use it as a burst skill. You use let me quickly showcase it. You cast it most often right after Fury, and then have everything explode at the same time with Fury finishing target off. So, you know, if you want to finish people off that way, just slot Fury. I think it's a better option than going Bloodthirsty instead of Arcane. Another honorable mention, I think not stressed this enough in previous guide, but Rune Cage, I see this in builds sometimes. Rune Cage is bad, okay? It's a shitty CC. I know it's unblockable, but it's very telegraphed, it can be roll dodged, and it does nothing else. It's never going to deal damage because people break free before it even lasts its full duration. So yeah, bad skill, don't run it. Other honorable mention, Chuden, as in every patch. If you want to have an explanation on why Mighty Chuden is a bad set, watch my previous guides, I do it every time. Just take it from me now, Mighty Chuden is a bad set. I don't like it at all. That being said, other honorable mentions include things like crit builds. There are some nice ideas with that new set that increases your critical damage you do to the target. I've forgotten the name just now, but in total that gives you 9% extra damage when you cast a Crushing Shock. It's nice to have like this, of course, but I still think in general it's more efficient to go with stat sets and getting damage through enchantments, mundus, etc. Or Malakath, instead of getting damage through front bar sets, be it offensive sets or proc sets. There are of course more things that I tested and I don't like, but I want to keep it a little bit short now, otherwise this guide is going to be too long. If you have any like other ideas, etc., just put them in the comment section or in the Discord server. I'll give you my opinion about it. Now, one thing I do quickly want to mention towards the end of this video is the Patreon that I have set up a few months earlier. I think it's been 2 months now. In any case, it's been received very well and I quite like that. I want to thank every one of you that has gotten the Patreon subscription over the past time. I'm quite surprised, to be honest. It's going well, and I like it very much. And thank you all very much as well for the support you've given me, be it through YouTube or Patreon or whatever. A follow-up on that, of course, this guide is a bit of a general information to everybody about the builds, etc. If you want to have more personal information, you can ask me things, and I will try and shortly reply to them in the Discord server or whatever. But if you either want to just give me some more support, which is of course greatly appreciated, or if you want to have some more kind of one-on-one advice, this can be done either with you sending me gameplay or a call on Discord, for example, where I directly help you with your build, be it for MagSorc or any other class that I play. Patreon is the way to go for that, and yeah, I'll stop selling out now. That is the end of the guide. I hope you've enjoyed and that this has been useful for you. And yeah, thank you all very much for watching. Like, subscribe, etc. But yeah, thank you and goodbye.